part of that. It does bring joy to our hearts, doesn't it?
It is.
Good. Well, that's a nice place to tie everything up with a nice big bow. However, I think we should do something really special for all our wonderful guests. How about we be a part of a massive, big group selfie? Fancy doing that?
Sure.
Shall we do that, guys?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so if you are able, please bring yourselves forward just a little bit. Bring yourselves in. If you're able to stand, please bring yourselves forward. Bring yourselves down the aisle. We're going to have Deep Roy and myself here at the front. We're going to snap away. So if you can, please feel free. Bring yourselves in. That's it. Get yourselves there. Get yourselves prepped and ready to go. And we're there. That's it. Excellent. To our wonderful crew at the front, you guys can stay sat if you would like, if that's the best spot. But for all our wonderful guests at the back, please bring yourselves through. Bring yourselves down the lines, guys. Guys, bring yourselves down the line. There we go. Excellent job. Super. Well, bring yourselves a little bit more towards the middle. That's brilliant. Excellent. Guys, bring yourselves in. Come and join us. Come and join us. That's super. Is that a nicer spot? Is that a nicer spot? I like it. Okay. Yeah, bring yourselves over just a little bit, guys. I feel... Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Blake!
Well, hello,
yes.
hello. Thank you so much. How lovely to see you all here. You're all looking marvellous.
As are you, good sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm, not bad for 46.
I know, younger than me. Well, welcome to Chester. How's your day been? Have you met some beautiful people? How's the cosplay been?
Well, yeah, but cosplay's always fantastic. Yeah, everybody manages to come looking pretty amazing. In fact, I kind of miss, because in the early days of doing these things, ladies and gentlemen, they used to ask us to judge the cosplays, but I think it was so difficult because you couldn't do a judging of any cosplay without insulting somebody, because it's always the people that don't get chosen that obviously come and kick you as you leave, just as you're trying to get home. So I think that's one of the reasons why we stopped doing the judging. It was a bit easier for us.
Yeah, absolutely. However, I do see a wonderful cosplay in our midst that I'm sure would have taken the win, and the head seems to be on the bar. But Greedo himself rocked it up today. Well done, good sir. Can we have a round of applause for the incredible character of Greedo?
Little Greedo. He looks a bit like he looks a bit like an ant that's sort of gone through a bit of gunge, doesn't he, really? But he's pretty impressive. I particularly like the eyes, which I think are made out of tea strainers, is that right?
Flower.
Something like that.
Is that right? Flower strainers, my goodness.
Yeah.
Homemade.
Yeah.
Homemade.
Homemade flowers.
That is how you do it.
Impressive. They're more impressive than the original ones, which were made to ping pong balls, which were sprayed black, so I couldn't see anything. In fact, I bumped into a lot of the furniture. And Harrison, actually. I bumped into him a few times.
Oh, let's go a bit deeper into that coming on, but I've got to say that's got to be something you hold in your heart to know that Greedo head is better than the original. I love it. Well, before we get into the juggernaut that is Star Wars, let's have a little chat about how you actually got to this wonderful career of showbiz.
How I started? Well,
yeah.
I was in at the age of 11, I was in a boy band. It must have been one of the earliest boy bands in history, I think, because it was...
Take that.
Yeah, everybody in the... I'm so old. I was born in the Boer War. So by the time 1960 came around, I was about 10 or 11-ish. And like everybody else in this country, learned to play guitar and practiced at the house of one of my mates, whose dad was a club organist, and he heard us singing once and said, "Oh, you're not too bad, you can hold a harmony together. Do you want to do a gig?" So we said, "Yeah, what's a gig? Can we do a gig?" And he said, "Well, you come to a club and play on the bill." So we did just that for about 3 years. So from the age of 11 to 14, I was making more money as a child still at school than I did in the next 25 years. But that's how I got, I suppose, the bug for performing. And then when we all left and went off to various colleges and all that sort of thing, we didn't see each other again. But then I went on, I suppose, because of a bit of that, on to study drama at university, and then was lucky enough when I left, this is how easy it was in the 1960s. I tossed a coin because I got offered a job as a teacher in a school in Birmingham. I'm a Brummie, or an ASM, that's an assistant stage manager, in a theatre in Glasgow, which just happened to be a pretty famous theatre at the time. I tossed a coin and it came down on the side of the theatre, and that's kind of how I got started. But I was very lucky because the theatre in Glasgow was called the Citizens Theatre, and in the company of the first year that I was in was a group of kind of lot of unknown actors. There was a chap called Alan Rickman and another chap called Gary Oldman and another girl called Celia Imrie and a big chap called Robbie Coltrane and a thin chap called Rupert Everett, another chap called Rupert Fraser. So it was a pretty star-studded introduction into the theatre, I think. So I was very lucky. That's how I got into it.
There's just one or two names that people might have heard of there from that particular class. Would love that. And that was all on the flip of a coin, getting to that stage. Imagine if it had gone the other way. Life
is serendipity, isn't it? Life is how you know, everything happens to you through serendipity. It's not, you can plan and plan and plan what you want to do, but in the end it's on the flip of a coin, generally.
Amazing. So if any of you go away from today just thinking about what you have taken away from Comic Con Mania Chester, the word serendipity needs to be tattooed on your arm. Have it written and Paul will sign it underneath. Love it.
Well, that's 35 quid.
And we take cash or card. Let's have a little chat about some of your heroes growing up, whether they be music-based, as you were in a band, or whether or not they be stage and screen. Who were some that you really cherished watching?
What are the people and the movies?
Let's have a little chat about your faves.
Again, I'm so old. I grew up on all the old black and white films from Hollywood. I loved the dance. Loved Fred Astaire and Fred and Ginge. They were fabulous. Loved all the early Katharine Hepburn stuff, Humphrey Bogart, even earlier actors, people you would never have heard of, like Robert Donat, was in the 39 Steps, the original film in the 1940s. So lots of great movies and great people. I was fortunate enough to do a few films with my heroes, most of which ended up on the cutting room floor. But so I loved. I was a great fan of Marlon Brando and Rod Steiger, and I worked with both of them in films. That was hugely lucky for me, particularly Steiger. He was kind of very interesting guy. But yes, that I suppose those are the sort of movies I really loved as a kid. But I did like sci-fi. I got into, I think I like everybody else at the time, I liked Star Trek and the early TV stuff of Star Trek. So that was my sort of formative years.
I love that. Well, from Star Trek to Star Wars, and just before we get into the juggernaut that is Star Wars, if anybody would like to pose any questions to Paul, please feel free, just catch my eye, throw your hand up, and we will pass it over to you. But let's talk about Star Wars. How did you land the role in one of the most iconic franchises the world has ever seen?
Again, back to serendipity. I was working with Anthony Daniels, who was C-3PO, and we were working for the BBC in a kids show, which some of you will remember, called Jack and Nori, which was a programme later on the BBC, telling of stories around about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening. And we'd done a Christmas special. And we finished that for about a fortnight, and I had a phone call from him late one evening, and he said, "Hi Paul, it's Anthony, just ringing up to see if you're doing anything." I said, "Well, are you kidding? I'm an actor like you, I'm out of work, you know." So he said, "Do you want to come and audition for this movie I'm in?" I'm movie? Yeah, and he said, I'm doing a sci-fi film, and my heart sank, because what you must remember is that in 1975-ish, every sci-fi film was a B-movie, particularly in England. So I thought, oh, Tony, you're going to be in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, you know, you have my sympathy. But he said, "Do you want to come along and audition for it?" And I said, "Oh, go on then, all right, if I have to." And then about a fortnight later, I found myself very early in one morning out at Elstree Studios, which is where they made A New Hope. That's the first one. It wasn't called A New Hope then, it was called Blue Harvest. That was the secret name for Star Wars. But I turned up on set on a big sound stage at Elstree. Nothing in there. It was about double the size of this tent, all in black and with massive amounts of lighting, very bright downlighting and sound everywhere. And right at the far end was a mock-up of what I later realised was the Millennium Falcon. But it was nothing that you saw in the film. It was a painting, a flat painting of two flats with a ramp going up the middle, which you walked up and fell off the end. That's how sophisticated Star Wars was. But anyway, there was no one in the room, and it was about 8:30 in the morning. I'd travelled all the way in from London, and so I was thirsty and hungry. And there was a guy in the corner, so I went over to him and said, "I'm Paul, I'm supposed to be..." "You couldn't get me a cup of coffee, could you? I'm really desperate. I'll go myself." He said, "No, I'll get you a coffee." So he went off, got a coffee, came back, gave it to me. I said, "Oh, thanks. Do you know anything about the movie they're filming here? I think it's some... I'm seeing a guy called George." So George, he said, I'm George Lucas." So I'd asked George Lucas to get me a cup of coffee at 8:30 in the morning, and he still gave me the job to this day. I can't imagine why he would have given me the job, but that's how I came to be doing Star Wars.
That's amazing. And again, serendipity. And I mean, I bet he held you in such esteem that you didn't go in sort of fangirling. Oh, it's George Lucas, and went in with a different stance.
He was entirely unknown. I mean, that's the first movie he'd done, so none of us knew who he was. He'd done American Graffiti in the States, of course. So we had no idea, and all of us English actors, most of us in that first movie were English. Because obviously it was cast in England. The Americans were Carrie and Harrison and Mark, and a couple of the American guys who lived in London. Richard Le Parmentier, who was one of the admirals, Garrick Hagan, who was Biggs, were the only sort of British-based American and Canadian actors. So at that point, it was mostly English people.
It just seems so overwhelmingly beautiful to be literally at the genesis of what Star Wars has become. It must hold a massive place in your heart. Have you become a Star Wars fan since being here?
Well, I have, because I suppose we've learnt more from you guys than we ever did from George, or what we were doing at the time, particularly if you only had a tiny part like I did. Normally on a movie where you're playing a bit part of some kind, you're in for a couple of days if you're lucky, a week if you're very lucky, 2 weeks if you're really lucky, and then that's the last you ever see of anybody, or until, if you're very lucky, the movie comes out and you're in it. So I've learnt a lot from the fans who've told me a great deal about what I didn't know, and in fact from the other actors who we've met over the years doing conventions. So that's been really interesting. And up until this day, I'm still informed about stuff. I didn't know what happened to my costume.
Oh, that's interesting. And have you? Do you?
Incidentally, until about 6 months ago, when one of the promoters of one of these shows came up and said, "Do you know what happened to your jerkin? You had a jerkin that you wore as Greedo." I said, "Did I?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh God, yeah, I remember. It was kind of like had pockets on it." He said, "Yeah. He said, "Do you know what happened to that?" Well, I said, "Well, I suppose George Lucas has it, because he has a lot of memorabilia in Skywalker Ranch in California, which is where he keeps all the original stuff." And he said, "Oh, no. That didn't..." He said, the costume department was so desperate at the time in 1976 for cheap alternatives and for recycling stuff that they'd already spent money on buying, that your jerkin ended up as part of Carrie's slave Leia bikini.
Wow!
So to this day, I learn things from everyone who knows a lot more about Star Wars than I did.
That's amazing. Well, thank goodness. I mean, I say thank goodness, but imagine if they brought the character back and gave you that costume.
Oh,
Yeah, step into that for us, Paul, will you please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thursdays and Sundays I'd wear that.
And that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's have a little chat about the epic scene, the most memorable scenes from New Hope, which was a really bad day for Greedo as he walked into the cantina and met a young Han Solo. Let's talk about your interactions with Harrison Ford.
Yeah, poor old Greedo. All I wanted was the money for the Millennium Falcon. You'd think it's reasonable.
It's not too much, is it?
Not too much to ask, and first job for Jabba. But Harrison, well, he was again. It was like George. He was an unknown at the time, but he was a bright cookie, charming. He knew that the weight of the movie was partially on his shoulders. Although, to be fair, the real weight, the gravitas of the movie was Alec Guinness, because Alec had a history of great films up until that point, and George knew that. George and the producers certainly knew that, so they wanted Alec to do it because of that station. But Harrison, I think everyone kind of knows the story of how he got the job. Maybe you don't.
Do we know how Harrison Ford got the job?
Maybe you don't, because he was reading in Hollywood when George was doing the initial casting for Han Solo, and they'd seen everybody in Hollywood at the time. And because George had worked with Harrison as a small part in American Graffiti and liked what Harrison had done, he asked him to read in at the auditions all the Hollywood A-listers who were auditioning for Han Solo at the time. And so Harrison did. And also the other thing is that Harrison was working as a woodworker in his spare time to make up the money that he wasn't earning from acting, because he wasn't a star at that point. And the story goes that he was on the roof of some woman's house in California, finishing off the shingles on the roof, bits and pieces, and he got the call from George saying, "We've decided that we couldn't cast anyone else. You were the best that I heard. We'd like you to play the part." And that woman is still waiting for her house to be finished. So I'm very sorry about that, madam.
But it's now officially priceless.
And he's now officially
And ruthless.
But that's kind of how Harrison was. He was charming, he was innovative, he was he threw in a lot of ad-libs with the script, because the script was very thick. And it was parts of it, I'm sorry about this, George, but parts of it were incomprehensible and needed filling out and other things. And Harrison was very good at that, as indeed were Carrie and other actors who said, "Maybe if we did this, is that okay, George?" And George was generous enough to say yes, and I like that better. Let's do that. So Harrison was very full of ad-libs, charming to work with, but very funny.
That's wonderful to have that free reign. And for a scene that has just taken on a whole life of itself, people dissect it, they look into it deep under the microscope and go forward with that wonderful Greedo and Han scene. How long did it take you to shoot that?
Well, I think like a lot of those things, very, very quick. We thought that was the one scene that was going to be cut.
Oh, did you?
Well, because remember all the other stuff was with Jabba.
Yeah.
Which was really, the now famous scene that I'm in, was really just repeating what Jabba had said in his previous scene with Han in front of the Millennium Falcon, which took a week and a half to film, because I was in the background of that. And so Harrison had a lot of dialogue with the original Jabba the Hutt, who was an actor called Declan Mulholland. And so we filmed that for about a week, and that's what we all thought was going to end up in the film. But then after about a week, George must have seen the rushes, and although Declan was a very good actor and done a really great job with Jabba, he was only a shortish Irish guy, and I think George thought, no, I want Jabba to be a bigger thing than Declan is doing at the moment. So that was all cut, and he was just then left with the one scene which Greedo was in. So we very quickly rushed that off on a Friday afternoon, and did it as quick as we could, because all the crew couldn't wait to get home. It was late, and they all worked a strict union schedule. So, tea breaks were observed, end of filming was observed, and so they couldn't wait to get it over with. So we thought, oh, well, that's the last we'll see of that as soon as we finished. But then something something happened.
Something happened, definitely. I mean, wow, what a wonderful story. Such an iconic scene shot really quickly. Speaking of shot really quickly, did you like the segue there? Can we confirm, for once and for all,
Yes.
who shot first?
Well, I have to say, I tend to ask people when they ask that question, so they ask it every day,
Yeah.
wherever I am, who shot first. And quite right too. I mean, I want to know as well. Is that I kind of ask them what their opinion is, because in the end, like all things in the movies, it does boil down to opinion. I mean, my preference is the original, so that Han shot first, because all the script said was that we played the scene right until the point that the scene ends. I think Greedo says, he says, over my dead body, and then Harrison says that can be arranged or whatever, and shoots. And all it said in the scene, in parenthesis, after the scene stopped, was Han shoots the alien. Greedo didn't even have a name then. That's I love that. That's what it said. So my preference is that informs the character of Han Solo, is that he's a space cowboy. It's a classic cowboy and Indian scene. He's in the saloon bar. He walks in, the bad guys at the bar. But then, of course, George changed it 10 years later, and everybody then took an opinion about that. Many people hated it. Many people thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting take. And then I think George changed it again. And his final reason, which I read about 4 or 5 years ago, was that he wanted to make the Han Solo character a lot more like the John Wayne character in the old westerns, where Wayne walks through the saloon bar, but he always gave the baddie the chance to go for his gun. And that's what George wanted to do with the Solo character, and that was his latest reason why he let Greedo sort of have a go. Even though Greedo misses by a mile.
That's amazing. Well, there you go. You've got your final answer.
There you go.
Han shot first. Murderer. That's what it is.
In fact, on Greedo's tombstone, it will say, "Here lies Greedo, he shot first." But on the back, it'll say, "Or did he?"
How physically demanding was it being within the confines of the makeup, of the mask? Was it something that was tricky getting on and off, or was it an easy fix?
Well, I think I was lucky in that the costume that I wore was made out of parachute silk, so it was very lightweight. It wasn't difficult to wear, and the mask finished about just below the neck, so I could actually take it off. So I was a lot luckier than Chewbacca, Pete Mayhew with Chewbacca, who was sweltered in the heat of that sound stage, and Anthony, who was in C-3PO, who was sort of bolted in into C-3PO, and Kenny, who was in little R2-D2. They all had a bad time from time to time, because it was a very hot summer and the sound stage had no air conditioning, so they had to open the doors to let in air. But from my point of view, it wasn't a difficult costume to wear. And as the old Dame Edith Evans used to say, once you've got the shoes on, from any costume, you've got the character. And for me, it was Greedo's gloves. Once I put the fingers on, I kind of got the idea of what Greedo was all about, really. Incidentally, the gloves that I wore as Greedo's hands were gardening gloves, which had long tubes sewn on them by the props department. And Greedo couldn't have even held the gun, let alone shot it, so he'd never have got a shot off in the first place.
Oh, what a brilliant story. Yeah, you think about it and think, Greedo couldn't have actually fired this weapon anyway. Excellent. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to pose any questions to Paul whilst he's up here with me, please feel free, just throw your hands up. We have got a young Jedi right here in the midst. Hello, good sir. What's your name? Jack. Zach. Amazing. What's your question?
So, if you were Greedo shooter, how did the plot change the action station?
I think that needs a high five. What a question. Excellent. I'm just going to ask it again, just because we've got a speaker outside. So, if Greedo was to have shot first, how do you think the plot would have changed?
Well, of course, it would have been Greediana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It would have been I would have run off with Princess Leia. I would have defeated Darth Vader all within 2 or 3 scenes. I think the whole in fact, now you come to mention it, the plot would have changed entirely in my... Why the hell didn't I shoot Han Solo when I had the chance? A very interesting question. You're absolutely right. From the rebels' point of view, it would have finished there and then for them, I think, if Han Solo, who was one of the main characters who held them all together, would have died there and then. It would have changed exponentially. So heaven knows what would have happened. But what an excellent question, I think. What do you think would have happened? I think you're right. I don't think anyone would have known. Mm-hmm. Excellent.
There we go.
Yeah, absolutely excellent.
Greedo for Emperor. We like that.
Yeah, Greedo as Emperor Palpatine. Yes, yes, he could have pulled off that cloak, couldn't he? I shall have to tell Ian McDermott.
Yeah, tell him all about that.
Yeah.
And again, an easy outfit to wear. Zach,
Yeah.
what an incredible... Can we have a round of applause for all our wonderful questions? Zach, I
Brilliant.
love that. What an amazing question, mate. We are coming over to this side. Hello, good sir. What's your name?
Dan.
Dan.
Dan, hello.
Hello. I'd just like to ask you, Paul, you said when you auditioned for it, you thought it was quite going to be a B movie.
Sure.
At what point did you realise it was going to be a blockbuster? And then following that, at what point did you realise it was going to be so culturally important?
Yeah, excellent question again. I mean, immediately it came out, everyone knew it was a success. That's for sure. I think the queues around the block, first of all in the States, and then here kind of proved that to everyone involved. I didn't see the movie at the premiere. I was actually working on another job, so I didn't see it until about 6 months later. But at that point, I knew the hype about it, so I knew everyone thought it was very good, and I read all the reviews, which were excellent for what was intentionally a children's film to begin with. So I read all the reviews, like everybody else who I knew who were in the film, and everyone knew that it was successful. But it didn't have that fan base for a long, long time. In fact, the first time I saw it, it was like you guys. I was in the Leicester Square Odeon in London, and I went with my wife, and I was so excited because Greedo doesn't come on until halfway through. So I got more and more depressed because, oh God, I've been cut from this film. I'm not in it at all. Until I heard the cantina music. And then I realised that was something to do with the scene that I'd shot. And I thought, oh, maybe. And then when I saw the scene beginning, I was so excited, I jumped up and said, that's me! So that's how excited I was about it. And like everyone else, when I saw it, as soon as the Star Destroyer goes across the screen with that Dolby sound, I was in there with the rest of the audience. But it took about 10 years, I think, for it to go on that journey of superstardom, as movies do, but as only the Star Wars franchise did. And then I think another 10 years for it to become the sort of, as you